you don't have the power of God, you won't make it in this final hour. If you don't have this anointing, you will not make it in the days to come. Only the power of the Holy Spirit will carry you through the storms that shall come. But those that know their God shall do exploits in His name. God's called you to do exploits in His name. There's people sitting here and you wondering, how in the world am I going to accomplish what God's called me to do? That which I feel the Lord's telling me to do is so big. It's in meetings like this where the fire of God's falling. Suddenly you see things you never saw before. Suddenly you know things you didn't know before. Somebody said, it's all over, Pastor, things are finished. I've got news for you, it's not over. I saw the hand of God clear the earth one more time. One more time. One more time He will shake. One more time nations will tremble and quake.
Нахуй!
Ваза несе спальню.
Едем. Далеко, ты туда далеко берешь. Да. Далеко.
Assert that we are at war.
But very frankly, we're at war.
Regime change in Russia is their actual objective, not defending Ukraine.
A dictator has invaded, without justification, a friendly country.
A game of chicken between nuclear powers is insane, and this from Joe Biden, who campaigned to be America's calming sedative.
It is unfortunate that at a time of war, that we spend all the time blaming our own president.
And to achieve this goal, they're willing to send billions to Kyiv that will line the pockets of corrupt officials, just like we did in Afghanistan. We are sleepwalking into a war, and the American people are left in the dark.
I wish we'd get off this and really focus on the enemy. I know there's a lot of politics here, but we're at war.
Representatives now
Nicholas here, Odyssey Media. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. I will show you why the major powers are now being convoluted into a major war by the shadow elites, creation of these wars, and why Putin invaded in Taiwan shall be as well.
War with China. It sounds unthinkable, but according to many experts,
The countdown may be on. China's President Xi Jinping is shaping up to the West like never before. And just last week, a major new military alliance was announced between the US, Australia and the UK to counter Chinese aggression in the Pacific.
The first major initiative of AUKUS will be to deliver a nuclear-powered submarine fleet for Australia.
America and its allies are preparing for a battle we didn't think was possible.
The idea that China would never attack, even never invade, well, I wouldn't count on that.
Xi Jinping is already on a collision course with his own people. From recently outlawing boy bands to enforcing propaganda lessons in primary schools. Xi Jinping is taking control, and he's prepared to fight for it even beyond his homeland. If this unimaginable conflict were to happen, it would begin with an invasion of Taiwan, the tiny nation off its coast that China has long believed is theirs.
Once they make the decision to do this, they will come full bore, like a crazy man with an axe.
Control of Taiwan would give China a huge new military reach over the Pacific.
That would put Australia in the firing line pretty quickly.
But is Australia putting itself in the firing line by talking too tough to China?
It is very dangerous to frame.
The world is once again being duped into war. And all of the mistakes that we've done in the past are about to repeat on a greater scale. I just don't understand. Everybody is ready for these lies to come out and for the wars to begin. The pretext of bigger things and nuclear Armageddon may be upon us. The world is converging and all of the nations are ready. Everything that was prophesied years and years and thousands of years ago by the great prophets, God's word is now being aligned to all of this. But nobody will listen. Everybody will just idly buy in their computers and idly buy on their Netflixes and worry about their own little bubble in their life. Meanwhile, the criminals are out here paying Nazis, paying communists, and paying literal Nazis directly. The Azov Battalion proudly sports the Nazi ideology and flags. We're literally paying Nazis with our tax-funded money. As this video clearly shows, the Galician division back in the Ukraine is making all of these things happen. And what will happen? What will happen once everything pops off? That's when humanity will see their worst, and that's when hopefully we get to see our best as well. Because if not, there was going to be great evil after that. None of this can be stopped now. Doesn't matter what anybody does. Everything's already too set in motion. The dominoes are already falling. Get ready for collapse. Get ready for war. I warned everybody that I thought I could. I tried to show everybody the truth. And now you're gonna see it for yourself. This is what humanity does. And humanity's great arrogance, and they'll lose all of the faith, and we kill each other at the end of the day. So, if there's any hope left, I hope that we can at least find love in each other, because death and genocide are coming. It is our own fault whatever happens in this war, because we are the ones that created this. Our own government has put us in the position of where we are now funding criminals in the Ukrainian government with ties publicly to Nazi-affiliated militias that are now integrated in their Ukrainian army and are now fighting in the front lines. Your taxpayer money is being funded there since 2014, when Senator John McCain began the whole connection and funneling U.S. assistance to these Nazis. Now you'll see exactly the corruption of the Joe Biden administration and his son in Ukraine as well. That whole cover-up All of these things are our faults. The war with Russia, the war with China. You'll now see all of the evidence before you. Sad. Completely sad.
When Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing because the corruption's massive. Now, when Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing because the corruption.
Investigation this morning into Joe Biden's son Hunter and questions about money he made from foreign business dealings while his father was vice president. Our chief national affairs correspondent Tom Yamas traveled to Ukraine to try to get some answers. And Tom, what did you find?
Dave, good morning to you. This is actually an issue Joe Biden has been dealing with since 2014, but it's come up again because he's now running for president. Republicans, including President Trump, are trying to hammer Biden over this. At issue was Hunter Biden profiting off his dad's work as vice president, and did Joe Biden allow it? We're talking about millions of dollars in at least 2 countries. Mr. Vice President, Tom Yamas with ABC News. How you doing? Got a quick question for you. It's a question we tried to ask repeatedly. Can we ask you about Ukraine and China? But kept getting blocked. Questions about foreign deals his son Hunter Biden pursued.
My father, Joe Biden.
In countries where Joe Biden was working as America's top diplomat. In 2014, Ukrainians, sick of corruption, revolted. Vice President Joe Biden went to Kiev to help the new government.
You have to fight the cancer of corruption.
But then, something strange happened. Just 3 weeks later, a Ukrainian natural gas company, Burisma, accused of corruption, appoints Hunter Biden, seen here in their promotional videos, to their board of directors, paying his firm more than $1 million a year. Hunter, a lawyer who had just been discharged from the Navy Reserves for testing positive for cocaine.
Mr. Hunter Biden.
He had served on other boards, but had no known experience in Ukraine or natural gas. We went to Kiev and found even among Joe Biden's supporters in Ukraine, Hunter's hiring was troubling. How do you judge what Hunter Biden was doing?
I think that Hunter Biden did a very bad thing, and he was very wrong. He allowed his name to be abused.
And Ukraine wasn't the only country where Hunter Biden's business and his father's diplomacy as vice president intersected. It also happened in China. This video shows Chinese diplomats greeting Vice President Biden as he arrived in Beijing in December of 2013. Right by his side, his son Hunter. Less than 2 weeks later, Hunter's firm had new business, creating an investment fund in China involving the government-controlled Bank of China. With reports, they hope to raise $1.5 billion. Hunter still plays a role in the fund. His lawyer says his stake is worth about $500,000. Both Hunter and his lawyers say he never discussed any of his overseas work with his father. But even a critic of the current president and his children's business dealings says this.
He should have encouraged his son to not take these positions.
Biden's campaign team told us that the vice president acted at all times in a manner consistent with well-established executive branch ethics standards. One person who did not want to talk about it, Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, what's your take on that? Was there a conflict of interest there? Was there a clear conflict of interest? Now, in response to our questions, the Biden campaign, for the first time, is announcing if he's elected, he will invoke a new ethics policy on his first day in office that would empower White House lawyers to monitor for any types of conflicts of interest. Now, Hunter Biden did not want to comment on camera. He says he was brought into Burisma, that Ukrainian company that was facing the corruption charges, to help with its transparency and corporate responsibility. So far, no charges have been brought against Burisma so far.
But these questions aren't going to go away, so in the meantime, is he still on the board for that company in Ukraine?
It's a good question, David. So the same month Joe Biden announces he's going to run for president, Hunter Biden tells us his term on the board expired. He says that the current political climate, he's decided not to renew.
Tom Yamas investigating
politicians, the president's sons, senators, before all of this crisis even started. Meddling with businesses and funding politicians, and we deserve whatever comes to this because it is our problem. We created Ukraine, okay? Just like we created what China is made to be now, which I'll show you after this Ukrainian part. We created what Ukraine is. What the issue is, we made Russia invade Ukraine because we're funding all these terrible forces. You have soldiers in the front lines being Nazis, just like their forefathers were conquered. So they're now, they put like facilities for their Nazi oppressors in Ukraine, and they put in cemetery and graves for them. And there's troops and militias that proudly sport the Nazi flag beside the Ukrainian flag. One of the craziest things is Zelensky himself put on his Instagram a soldier that was wearing a Hitler's skull. And this skull was from the concentration camps for the Third Reich. It was for the people that were responsible for rounding people up and putting them in the gas chambers. You have his soldiers sporting those skulls. And that's why you have Zelensky himself doing the salute. Nazi ideology is perfectly integrated into their community, their school, their society. They have monuments of their past oppressors that they have not yet let go of. And if the American people knew that we're sending billions of dollars, $40-50 billion to fund these people, they have reenactments of their war, of the Nazis when the Nazis took over Ukraine back in World War II. They wear Nazi patches alongside their Ukrainian flags. This is embedded in their society. They have statues of Nazis all around Ukraine, in their schools, and their children, past Nazis that gassed Jews, in their militias, in their army. And as you see, there are symbols that they bear on their patches. You saw Zelensky's picture of his soldiers with a skull. This is what these Nazis do in Ukraine, but we don't get to see this because the Western corporate controlled media does not show you what these Nazis do in Ukraine. Okay? This war would be over. The financing for their weapons and their help from the West would be over if the West knew these pictures, knew these videos, knew this information. But nobody likes to research the history of the funding that we're heading to. But no, we have to get hit with inflation. But the Nazis in the front lines of the culture war and the war get our billions of dollars. Can you imagine if the left knew all of this? No, you know, they don't research. They just take whatever corporate media says and eat it. They eat it up. That's why they eat up all of the BS and all of the lies, and that's why we're going to war. That's why Ukraine is our fault, because we are funding these ultra radical Nazis that are in power, and Zelensky supports these people.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Ukraine's top prosecutor says he's opening an investigation into the company tied to Hunter Biden. Roxana Saberi reports from Kiev, where President Trump's growing dilemma has put Ukraine's president in the spotlight.
You're good looking.
Ukraine's media-savvy president is used to cameras. But these days, he tries to avoid them when it comes to questions about President Trump.
Were you told that you had to launch an investigation into the Bidens or promise an investigation just to visit the White House?
You read everything about the Biden. That's all.
Mr. Zelensky has said Mr. Trump didn't pressure him to investigate the Bidens, but text messages appear to show U.S. diplomats promised he could visit the Oval Office if he announced an investigation into the Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma, where Hunter Biden was on the board. And on Friday, Ukraine's new prosecutor general said he'll review several past investigations, some involving the owner of Burisma, though he said no one had pressured him to do so.
I've never met Rudy Giuliani. Never.
Before Mr. Zelensky had to deal with this international drama as president, he was a comedian who played a president on Ukrainian TV. The show made him so popular, Mr. Zelensky launched a political party named after it, Servant of the People, winning this year's presidential election in a landslide.
Now, nearly 4.5 months since Zelensky swept to office, people here in Kiev have mixed feelings about how he's done so far. Some people say his lack of political experience has been refreshing. Others say it's already proven to be a cause for concern.
President Zelensky is having to learn fast now that he's playing a reluctant role in American politics. Roxana Saberi, CBS News, Kiev.
And these reports about the Azov Battalion that is said to be Nazi-affiliated organization operating as a militia in your country, said to be committing their own atrocities. What should Americans know about that unit, about those reports?
So Azov was one of those many battalions. They are what they are. They were defending our country. And later I want to explain to you. Everything from all the components of those volunteer battalions later were incorporated into the military of Ukraine. Those Azov fighters are no longer self-established group. They are a component of the Ukrainian military. Back in 2014, there were situations when our volunteers were encircled, and some of them did violate laws of Ukraine. And they actually were taken to court and got prison sentences. So law is above all.
Уважаемые коллеги, вы видите, что западные страны предпринимают не только недружественные действия в отношении нашей страны в экономической сфере, я имею в виду нелегитимные санкции, о которых все хорошо знают, но высшие должностные лица ведущих стран НАТО допускают и агрессивные высказывания в адрес нашей страны. Поэтому приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства.
Building all of this capability, they look like a first-use weapon. That's what those weapons look like to me.
politically to walk back from his commitment to take Taiwan. That would be the end of his power base, the end of his control.
The Chinese Communist Party claims Taiwan is historically part of China, which, strictly speaking, isn't true. The island has an indigenous population dating back thousands of years. A flourishing democracy, Taiwan would be an immense strategic and economic prize.
From last year, our radar stations have detected incursions by nearly 2,000 Chinese military aircraft and over 400 military vessels.
Not only would it give China a military footprint well into the Pacific Ocean, it would also give China fabulous wealth. Taiwan has the 6th largest foreign exchange reserve in the world. And the island state supplies the bulk of the world's semiconductor computer chips, critical to most modern manufacturing products, from washing machines to cutting-edge weaponry. And it's sitting there, out of China's clutches, with America's backing. Why does China need Taiwan so badly?
Taiwan is the veritable unsinkable aircraft carrier from which China can project military power deep out into the Central Pacific. Taiwan demonstrates to the world that you can have prosperity and democracy.
Taiwan is definitely a prize.
Just like Ukraine and us funding the Nazis and the corrupt government, China and the upbringing of their power in the world stage is also our fault. This is the American government's fault. Top Air Force General warns China could soon spring surprise nuclear strike on U.S. China's test of a hypersonic weapon. Amazing. How did this come to be? How are they ready to attack Taiwan? Well, we gave them everything they needed. Back in World War II, the precursor of the CIA, the OSS, gave them the financial and the military backing, as well as everything they needed from the financial sector in the United States, as well as Chase Bank. Rockefeller took a historic trip to China as well. 1973, meeting with all of their communist leaders, helping them with their financial tools and lending. I mean, the OSS, one of the OSS officers even wrote, William C. Spratcher wrote, the OSS in support of the China's communists, and how the OSS during World War II made a plan to where they wanted to get the communists and the nationalists together against Japan. However, the dispute between the nationalists and the communist Chinese abrupted that, and guess what? The OSS, again the precursor of the CIA, had no choice but to continue founding Mao's communist regime to destroy the Japanese. Continue offer aid and munitions and everything you needed. And this is how the communists came to full storm power, because they would have how do you think Taiwan was created? The nationalists fled to the island of Taiwan after the communists got all these arms and weapons and benefits from the OSS. We made communist China. We made Nazified Ukraine. We made these wars. Yes, Russia and China are bad, but guess what? We gave them, the United States gave China the financial backing through these international banks and direct military support by the ROSS. That came from Washington. These orders, these secret government orders that go above the officers in the battlefield. So anything that happens directly correlated with the China and Taiwan is all of America's doing and fault, because we meddled in there and we went for the communist. The secret government wanted the communist regime to part. Now they want the whole world to be a communist regime under their power. That's why the elites like communism. But the elites are ready and they're willing to go to nuclear war, because out of nuclear war, they'll control all the masses after they forget everything. So, I mean, whatever happens with China and Taiwan, we have laid the groundwork for it. And it's just like Ukraine. We are fueling the flames of war and blaming it on other countries. And again, I'm not saying the communist regime of China is not evil. They created COVID-19 and gave us a bioweapon. They have concentration camps. China's worse than the Nazis. But we are worse in the world because of the shadow government of the United States and Illuminati. So, I'm here to expose that, guys. All of this is public. These are government documents explaining how we helped Mao Zedong. You see it? This is the receipts. Odyssey Media. Nicholas.
44 that the Kachin operating with the OSS accounted for 85% of its intelligence on likely targets. As the war in Asia approached the endgame stage, the OSS pursued other collaborations with Japan's enemies. Throughout the war, the Allies had been baffled in their attempts to enlist China's aid in fighting the war against Japan. The country was split into two main factions, the nationalists under Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek and the communists led by Mao Zedong. In July 1944, frustrated by years of half-hearted and ineffective participation by the Nationalist Army, the OSS turned to the Chinese Communists. OSS sent a team of officers to Yenin on what was called the Dixie Mission, to meet with Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai and other members of the Chinese High Command in the hope of persuading the Communists to support the Nationalists in a concerted effort against the Japanese. But when strong political opposition to these overtures arose in Washington, the OSS was forced to withdraw the mission.
The heart of Texas, the U.S. resistance against a global corporate combine, empowered and funded by Communist China, allied with the big mega banks that set up Communist China in 1949. The Communist Chinese have taken control of U.S. telecommunications infrastructure. The Communist Chinese have taken control of Hollywood. The Communist Chinese have taken control of the main universities. This is all confirmed. This is not a drill. Big tech in Silicon Valley is almost completely run by the Communist Chinese government. They've officially become state-run. Apple, 100%. Google is now making the transition and announcing a merger and total worldwide censorship. They are now beta testing using me as the straw man, a demonized version of Alex Jones, to do that. This is happening. This is not like the other probes before that were meant to get you used to probes and censorship, thinking you would adapt to censorship by just putting up with it. Now this attack is thousands and thousands and thousands of times the magnitude of all previous attacks. This is a titrated dose, reverse psychological warfare operation using adapt and overcome, subversion, paradigm manipulation. In layman's terms, they are manipulating the fact that we adapt to being oppressed. We adapt to being pressed at the low dosages of oppression. And now when the megaton hits us of the total takeover, we try to adapt to the poison infusion instead of not knowing it's a lethal dose if we accept the dose. Total Internet of Things, integration, global social score, complete command and control system. It is the virtual reality AI weapon system now attacking the United States with traitors inside the major security agencies, blocking Trump's resistance of the program and attempting to stop us from removing the tentacles of the Chi-Com/Big Tech Banking Combine emergency situation. I have been chosen for destruction because I brought you this information and have been ramming it out as much as I can. They want to double use me, as they always do in any complex system of mathematical deception, where every angle of my good is turned against us. So they take what I've said, being sincere, build me into an insincere person in the straw man. I'm a person that cares about life and children and is against these wars. And so they make me a herder of children. And then they build me into this lie to then set the distraction while they're actually censoring all of you to make a debate about Alex Jones. So even if I didn't sell out to them, they now use me as an archetype to serve them by being the main distraction. I have now been captured by the enemy in the information warfare fulcrum and is being used against you. Only your full understanding of this key will break you free from this paradigm. I have given you the transmission. Now break free.
about our leaders, our society, and our relations with the rest of the world is wrong. America is facing two major challenges. One is the Chinese Communist Party. However, the most significant threat comes from within.
You're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world.
Okay, Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about.
We've already seen evidence of how the elites want to run the United States. They're modeling themselves after Chinese autocracy.
For over a decade, the People's Republic of China has stood publicly accused of acts of cruelty and wickedness that match the cruelty and wickedness of medieval torturers and executioners.
Dianne Feinstein had a Chinese spy as her driver for 20 years.
We're not talking about one person infiltrating senior levels at the CIA or the White House. We're talking about an entire elite class throughout the political, corporate, academic, cultural, and media establishment. My name is Lee Smith. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. This is the most astonishing espionage and infiltration operation in history. What you're going to see in this series will shock you. This is The Enemy Within.
Министр иностранных дел Британии Ли Страс, что все может вылиться в конфликт России с НАТО, президент Путин привел наши ядерные силы сдерживания в особый режим несения дежурства. Попросту говоря, мы сейчас наготове. А что будет после слов Бориса Джонсона об ответном ударе по России? Вообще на Британских островах, похоже, заговариваются. Зачем грозить ядерным оружием бескрайней России, сидя на, в общем-то, маленьком острове? Остров столь мал, что лишь одной ракеты «Сармат» достаточно, чтобы его утопить раз и навсегда. Все уже подсчитано. Погрузить Британию в морскую пучину российский подводный робот-беспилотник «Посейдон». Он приближается к цели на километровой глубине со скоростью 200 км в час. Нет никакого способа остановить этот подводный дрон. Боеголовка на нем мощностью до 100 мегатонн. Взрыв этой термоядерной торпеды у берегов Британии поднимет гигантскую волну, цунами высотой до 500 метров. Такой водяной шквал является еще и носителем экстремальных доз радиации. Пройдя над Британскими островами, он превратит то, что от них, может быть, еще и останется, в радиоактивную пустыню, надолго непригодную хоть для чего-то.
Resolve disputes is through military force. I think we see that on the Chinese side, but I think we also see that in some of the opinions that have been put forward this evening.
If China takes Taiwan, it doesn't stop. It's the first step in that expansion. China has told us that. The only thing stopping China from invading Taiwan is consequences. So if the United States or Australia said we will not be involved, that massively increases the chances that China will be inclined to use force to so-called resolve this Taiwan question.
If you have the US going into harm's way to defend Taiwan, which after all, remember, is a fellow Western liberal democracy, just like Australia, we would be negligent in our responsibilities as a US ally if we stood back and did nothing. I do think that it is incumbent upon our government of the day to recommend and make the decision to intervene alongside the United States to defend Taiwan.
And Clinton, what is your message to Australians?
Well, they should understand that the Chinese government's resolve has been well expressed, and I believe it is genuine. They intend to take Taiwan by peace or by war. And the question is, what happens not just to the region, but to Australian society as a consequence?
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We are going to begin to act, beginning today. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. We, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. America must win this war. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed, and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the people. The crisis we're facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds. The solutions we seek must be equitable, with no one group singled out to pay a higher price. That we are a united people, to believe that together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans.